Race Remix.
This podcast draws together themes of generational migration through language, music, and general code switching.
We've all drawn from our personal experiences growing up and interacting with our families, as well as observing the differences of their experiences versus ours through the migration from generation to generation.
Our overall theme is transit, transmission, and transgression through migration and displacement in language, sound, and music.
In this section, we're diving into the fascinating evolution of language through the lens of code switching, how we shift between styles of communication, and how the digital world has transformed it. Let's talk about what happens when language travels across generations, cultures, and platforms. Code switching is the practice of alternating between two or more languages or varieties of language in conversation. It's how people navigate different social, cultural, or linguistic settings. Think of a bilingual speaker flipping between English and Spanish, or how you might talk to your boss versus your best friend. But here's where things get interesting. The internet has brought us into a new era of digital code switching. For example, on Twitter, you're limited to short, punchy phrases, maybe even hashtags. Compare that to TikTok, where slang thrives, or Reddit, where niche communities build entire vocabularies. Each platform has its own norms, creating a kind of linguistic ecosystem. These niche communities build language extremely fast. Take the word Riz. Heard it before? It's short for charisma and was popularized by Twitch streamer Kai Cenat in 2022. It's become a shorthand for charm or flirtation. In 2023, Oxford University Press named Riz its word of the year, beating out situationship and Swiftie. Words start in specific subcultures but quickly spread, crossing generations and even global boundaries. The word came from Baltimore street slang in 2021 and is now worldwide. My own grandparents were even asking me about the word after hearing it from one of my younger cousins. When my cousins text me, they might say something was fried. When my grandparents talk to me, they will sometimes use terms I've never heard of, idioms that seem lost to time. We're all navigating the same world, but our language marks our generational identities and the culture we are a part of. The origins of these words are usually never thought about. I recently found out about many of the words that I use were originally slang. Dude, which is now becoming more gender neutral, referred to a dandy man in the 19th century. Cool, as a term that describes something being stylish, good, or impressive, came from jazz culture in the 1940s and 50s. Think of it as migration. Words travel, picking up new meanings and shedding old ones. Their meanings changed, adapted like all language, yet they still say something about the culture they came from. Online spaces don't just reflect generational divides, they create them. Subcultures on platforms like TikTok, Reddit, and 4chan act as linguistic petri dishes. Words like Karen, simp, and based started in tight-knit online communities, but eventually burst into mainstream culture, often transforming along the way. These words carry meaning beyond their definitions. They carry baggage, and sometimes that baggage can change how we see the world. Take the word incel, short for involuntary celibate. On the surface, it might seem like a neutral way to describe a particular social experience. But in online communities where it originated, it became tied to dangerous ideologies and toxic attitudes. When the word spread to mainstream discourse, so did these associations, reshaping conversations about gender and relationships. Or consider the term Chad. Initially used in certain corners of the internet to mock a confident, attractive man, it also reinforces ideas about social hierarchies and disability. Words like Chad or even virgin don't just describe, they construct. They influence how people think about themselves and others, and they reflect the values and biases of the communities that created them. These aren't just words, they're cultural artifacts. As they spread, they carry the ideologies of their origins into new spaces, influencing how mainstream culture talks about identity, relationships, and power. In this way, online subcultures don't just invent new slang, they disrupt, challenge, and reshape societal norms. It's a reminder that language isn't just about communication, it's about influence. Online spaces may accelerate these changes, but they're a part of a larger story of how people use language to signal who they are, what they value, and where they fit or don't fit within a system. Whether it's a TikTok trend or your grandparents' slang from decades ago, the words we choose reflect our connections to time, culture, and identity. And as language keeps evolving, it asks us to evolve with it, adapting to new norms, challenging old ones, and sometimes breaking the rules altogether. So what does this mean for the future of language? Code switching, whether it's bilingual families blending Spanish and English, or a teenager toggling between formal essays and TikTok comments, shows how adaptive and resilient we are. And yet beneath all this language remains a bridge, connecting generations, cultures, and even strangers across the globe. Next time you learn a new phrase or hear an interesting word, think about what you say and where those words came from. And maybe teach your grandparents what Riz means.
I'm Sally Wenger, and in this part of the podcast, I'm going to be talking to my mom about bluegrass, specifically her relationship with the music and her father's relationship with the music, and how those ideas have migrated across generations and changed. We also get a little bit into the history of bluegrass and her personal history of music taste and kind of how that evolved throughout her life. Enjoy! You want to say hi?
Hi.
You want to introduce yourself?
Hi. My name is Jenny Woosley Wenger.
It's my mom. So when I think of bluegrass, I think of Granddad, but I also think of you and your distaste for it. Did he like it as much as he does now when you were growing up?
Oh, always.
Yeah.
And as you know, I grew up in the Southern Appalachians in Western North Carolina. There were bluegrass festivals, and there still are, and we traveled to bluegrass festivals. But there were also very regular bluegrass performances in Cullowhee. And when I was a child, I liked that music. I didn't mind it at all.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a child, though, in the late 60s and early 70s, bluegrass and country music were much closer together. Although bluegrass has always been distinct from country, country music is more along the lines of Johnny Cash, Dolly Parton, Porter Wagner in those days.
Mm-hmm.
Bluegrass was always, a bunch of guys, one of whom played a stand-up bass. And
spoons.
There was always a banjo. Sometimes there were spoons, always a banjo. But the bluegrass music also, in my mind, is linked pretty closely to clogging and the other kinds of traditional dance.
Okay. And where does bluegrass come from?
I'm not a musicologist, but probably it has its roots in the settlers from the British Islands, anywhere from Scotland, primarily Scotland, Wales, and England, who came over to the United States, in the 1600s, 1700s, and settled in the Appalachian Mountains, all the way from West Virginia down through North Carolina, but then also into Tennessee and Kentucky too, northern Georgia.
Is there
Virginia.
Is there more bluegrass in Kentucky where Granddad's from, or is there more in Cullowhee where you grew up?
I don't know. It was everywhere. There were things like the Old Timey Fiddlers Contest, which was in Kentucky.
Right.
And there are, at least modestly successful bluegrass bands that have been playing for a long time. But over time, bluegrass and country got further apart.
Uh-huh.
Because bluegrass is, although there might be bands that would be considered to be innovative, it is inherently
Folky.
to my way of thinking, it's inherently a music that's rooted in the past.
Yeah, it's very folky and it just sounds old.
It's very folky. I've never seen a bluegrass band that didn't play classics.
Okay. So they're all kind of cover bands.
In a sense, yeah. They may write their own music too.
Right.
But they all play, old songs.
Do you think a lot of the people who are from the Appalachians who make country music have roots in bluegrass?
Yes.
Because it's just so everywhere?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you lived in the South until we moved to California.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you lived in Texas, which is different, but that's not bluegrass country, but that's still country.
That's country, yeah.
Did you ever come back to country music after you moved out of the South? Does it have a different sort of connotation to you now that you live far away from your parents?
Maybe. I mean, I have more tolerance for bluegrass now than I did in my, teen and young adult years.
Yeah. Well, I moved to California when I was 9. But I remember living in Georgia and being like, everybody hated country music. That was like the thing. Not everybody in Georgia, but like in my generation, people are like, I'll listen to anything but country. Because it was all like, especially in the 2010s, like Luke Bryan, like
Georgia, Florida line. It was big stadium pop country.
But then...
by people from places like the Michigan suburbs, the suburbs of Detroit.
Pennsylvania, whatever. Yeah. But then now I think country's kind of having a resurgence, like older, folkier country. I really like that music, which is interesting because I didn't grow up listening to any country music, but it still reminds me of not really Georgia, but more, I think, country. I think of your parents, and I think of being in Appalachia.
Well, and my father's path to country was through rockabilly. I mean, as a young man, he liked the rock and roll music of his times. He was born in 1934, so we're talking about 1950. He listened to the Everly Brothers, Wake Up Little Susie. He listened to Patsy Cline, whose at least one of her biggest hits was written by Willie Nelson. Mm-hmm. He saw Willie Nelson play very early on when Willie Nelson had a flat top.
Right.
Thought he was spectacular. But so he kind of started in that rockabilly world, and then as country music began to go in one direction, I would argue, and rock and roll went in the other, then Elvis came onto the scene, and my father sort of decided to go the country route.
Right.
All these musics are beginning to separate.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the Delta Blues, which had far less influence on anything from the Appalachians, but had more rock influence. That eventually became,
Stones and...
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, cool. Awesome.
Migration and displacement significantly impacts the linguistic landscape of communities. These processes shape language use, cultural identity, and social interrogation. We will explore the relationship between migration, displacement, and language. As people move across countries, cultures, and continents, their language travels with them, shaping identities, preserving traditions, and navigating the complexities of belonging. In the Mexican community, many migrate to the United States in hope of opportunities, jobs, and a better future. However, many struggle due to the new shift in language, culture, and discrimination. ¿Quién eres y de dónde eres?
Soy María Kimball y soy de Nogales, México.
¿Y cómo aprendiste el inglés?
Practicándolo en el trabajo.
¿Cómo aprendiste en el trabajo? Sí, por otra gente.
Por otra gente practicando entre los mismos compañeros de trabajo.
¿Cuáles problemas enfrentaste a mudarse a los Estados Unidos?
El principal, el idioma, y el segundo, la cultura muy diferente.
¿Cómo sabemos español mis hermanos y yo?
Nunca les quise quitar el idioma, que aprendieran ustedes español, porque el inglés lo iban a aprender de todas maneras en la escuela.
¿Enfrentaste esos problemas cuando teníamos tarea nosotros de inglés?
Sí, sobre todo con el primer hijo, sí, tenía que traducir del inglés al español y del español al inglés para poderle ayudar en las tareas.
¿Y por qué crees es importante saber ambos idiomas?
Porque es más fácil enfrentarte en todo sentido, poder comunicarte mejor.
Y ahora que sabes el idioma inglés, ¿cómo te ha hecho la vida más fácil?
Es mucho más fácil poderte comunicar, poderte desarrollar un poquito más con los dos idiomas.
In the past, many schools in the U.S. would only teach in English, which made it difficult for first language Spanish speakers, also known as ELLs. As of 2023, Arizona is the only state with English-only education legislation still in effect. In the article, English-only education is on decline, but Arizona holds out, posted by the American Immigration Council staff, states, "Since the institution of Prop 203 in 2000, ELLs in Arizona have suffered. The graduation rates are 20% below the national average, while the standardized test scores fall far below those of the state's general population." Because of this struggle and discrimination, many Latinos stopped teaching their kids Spanish. They believe that their children shouldn't have to struggle like they did. But it does more harm than good. Losing the Spanish language can block opportunities and connections with family members. I know friends who can't communicate with their nanas because they don't know Spanish or aren't fluent in it. In the Latino community, these people are categorized as no sabo kids. In Spanish, I don't know is translated to no sé, but many Latinos mispronounce this as no sabo.
Hi, my name is Linda Rivero. I'm a second generation Latina. My mom's Mexican and my dad's Cuban.
How did you learn Spanish?
I learned Spanish by my mom, just the only language I really knew. Until I hit preschool is when I had challenge with learning English, and now I know more English than Spanish.
Do you use Spanglish, and what ways do you use it in conversations?
I do. Sometimes I don't know words in Spanish, so I say it in English while speaking Spanish, or sometimes I do the opposite.
What are your thoughts on being called a no sabo kid?
It hurts sometimes. It hurts my feelings, but sometimes it's okay, yeah, I know I could be a no sabo kid because sometimes I don't know words in Spanish. Mostly when I can't pronounce my R's, so it's really hard for me to say some words in Spanish. So I get called no sabo kid frequently, but used to bother me, but now I just make it as a joke.
Today, many Mexicans and Latinos code switch between Spanish and English in their conversations. This is also known as Spanglish. I often find myself doing this in conversations with friends and family. I feel like it makes it easier for me to get my point across. This code switch is part of my bilingual identity. If my mother hadn't taught me Spanish, this is an identity I would have lost. Culture has also shifted for many Mexican Americans. Norms such as career choices, dating life, gender roles, music, and values were changed and adapted to American culture. Today we have music genres such as banda and norteño that have gained popularity in the United States. Artists such as Selena and Jennifer Lopez have helped popularize Mexican American culture in the media. Holidays such as Dia de los Muertos and Cinco de Mayo are celebrated in both countries. The Mexican culture has also become an important component of the United States identity. They enrich diversity in the nation, bring creativity, and share a multicultural landscape.